This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. I know it's really hot. Mark, LaBarr, and I are here. We're both from Audubon, Vermont. We're both biologists. I've been at Audubon for a little over 10 years now, working on a variety of projects, from peregrines, eagles, to shrubland and grassland birds. And I'll let Mark say his hello, and then we'll start our slideshow.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. It would have been nice to do this in the field, but alas, with the way things are going, we're going to make do with what we got tonight. We got a little video. As Margaret said, I'm a conservation biologist as well. I work with endangered common terns up on Lake Champlain, as well as work with Margaret on a lot of the Champlain Valley conservation projects that we have going. And so it's great to be able to talk about some of the stuff that we're doing and some of the things we hope to do at Wheeler Park.
Okay, so just to get started, I thought I'd give you a little bit of background on the work that we do with birds in the Champlain Valley, mostly birds that nest in grasslands and shrublands. This project is part of a much larger project that National Audubon considers a priority, their Healthy Forests project. So when we think about grasslands and shrublands, we might not think of them as forests, but as you'll see, we'll talk about them in kind of terms of how they want to be forests. But our work is a project called the Champlain Valley Bird Initiative, which is focused mostly on, like I said, grasslands and shrublands and the birds that live in those types of habitats. So on the lower right, you'll see a grassland, and on the lower left, you'll see a shrubland. And in this upper middle picture here, the green is a priority area called Bird Conservation Region. Mark, you'll have to tell me the number because I've already...
13.
Which encompasses the upper Champlain Valley, or the Champlain Valley, the upper St. Lawrence River Valley, and it goes into the Great Lakes. So this part of Vermont is part of this bird conservation region, whereas the other parts of Vermont are part of a different one, which is a more forested region. So when you think about habitats in terms of succession, which is how something changes from, say, a grassland to a forest, in order to keep something a grassland, you have to keep maintaining it that way. It doesn't naturally, at least in Vermont, it doesn't naturally stay a grassland. It wants to become a mature forest over time. So it may start as a grassland with 100% grasses, and then gradually woody shrubs will move in, some saplings will move in to that grassland, and then eventually it becomes a mature forest. This takes a number of years to happen, but the habitats that we're focusing on when we talk about the habitats in Wheeler Park and some of the areas that we're working in the Champlain Valley are these sort of intermediate stages where you've still got openings, you've got shrubs, and you've got trees. So if you didn't do any management here, it would eventually become a forest, but in order to maintain it in this stage, you need to be able to cut back some of this habitat. So typical habitats, early successional habitats or young forested habitats in the Champlain Valley. You can see from this upper right picture, when you look from the top of Snake Mountain, you get a picture of what the Champlain Valley looks like. It's a mix of openings, grasslands, some forest patches, and it's hard to tell from this picture, but you've also got these sort of fallow fields that are turning from grassland into shrubland. We also have in the Champlain Valley power lines, which are actually maintained as shrublands because the power companies don't want the trees to grow up, and they do their management about every 4 years. And in order to maintain the vegetation to be low and not hit the power lines, we end up having a shrubland that's maintained over time. And some of the birds that like these habitats, starting in the lower left and moving up to the upper right. So these bird species in the lower left, I'll highlight some of them. This is the eastern meadowlark, which is a grassland bird species. Some of the shrubland species are in the middle here, like eastern towhee, American woodcock, and golden-winged warbler, which we'll talk about quite a bit. And then as you get into the more mature forest, you see rose-breasted grosbeak or veery. So the birds that we're really focusing on are in the center here when we talk about Wheeler Park. And we have, Audubon has come up with a number of what birds that we consider to be priority species. These are birds that are all declining across their range. Some of them are relatively common, but they're still declining, and some are fairly rare. So when you look at this list, American woodcock, eastern towhee, prairie warbler, blue-winged warbler, golden-winged warbler, field sparrow, and brown thrasher. And the ones that are highlighted in red are ones that I've seen at Wheeler Park. Pretty sure there's probably American woodcock there. And we're hoping we'll probably, if we do some management there, we'll be able to bring in blue-winged or golden-winged or both. Prairie warblers less likely because they tend to live in the southern part of the state.
That said, there's been a prairie warbler singing at the Catamount Town Forest just over the way for this spring so far. So sometimes they show up.
Yeah, and I know they've been in Heinsberg, so you never know. So just to focus on these two species, the golden-winged warblers and the blue-winged warblers, they are kind of the poster child of some of this work that we do. Golden wings especially, because they are a species that's been petitioned to be listed on the Endangered Species Act, although that has not gone anywhere yet. But they are declining quite a bit in range-wide. And blue wings, which are very closely related, we can go into more detail later, maybe about some of the genetics that these two share. But blue wings are increasing here, but they're decreasing in other areas. So we're seeing some range shifting. So in Vermont, we had a 7% decrease in golden wings from one bird atlas to the next. And a bird atlas is kind of a comprehensive survey of the state to document the presence of species throughout the state. So we saw a decline for golden wings in Vermont, but we saw quite a bit huge increase of blue wings in Vermont. And what we're seeing in general is blue wings increasing in northern states, whereas they're decreasing in some of the southern states. Like you can see, Maryland here is down almost 30% from their atlas data, whereas golden wings tend to be decreasing everywhere. And what these two, because they're so closely related, do is they hybridize. And so there are actually two named hybrids that the combination of these two can create. But there are also everything in between. So you can see Lawrence's warbler here looks kind of like a blue wing with the mask and the chin markings of the golden wing, whereas the Brewster's warbler's more pale body with the dark eye line of blue winged. But in Vermont, we're kind of at the hotspot of hybridization, and so we see every color in between. Because golden wings have been considered to be a pretty high priority species for conservation, a group got together called the Golden Winged Warbler Working Group and nationally put together a plan that both highlighted focus areas for conservation as well as management plans and quite a bit of information all compiled together. And we in the Champlain Valley fall into what they consider to be Great Lakes 16, GL 16 focus area and part of GL 15. From the work that Mark and I have done, we now know that these two can probably merge together and include the entire Champlain Valley. But as you can see, they thought we had about 210 individuals in this area. We've learned that we have quite a bit more, although they're still not very common. So what we've done over time has been to try to determine where golden wings are in the state, both through a variety of survey methods. And our most recent one is a model that a student at Antioch University put together that has chosen priority parcels where he thinks there is the most golden wing warbler habitat in the Champlain Valley. And so this red shows his initial model, which is part of his graduate thesis in the southern Champlain Valley, plus areas in the northern Champlain Valley in yellow that he just did for us outside of his graduate thesis.
And you can see in that map, one of the largest concentrations is right there south of Burlington, where
Right.
Wheeler lies and a lot of the projects that we're working on. So this area has been a big focus for us.
Right, and yeah, we'll go into more detail of some of the work we've done near Burlington, but there's also a large concentration of golden wings and blue wings down in West Haven on some property owned by the Nature Conservancy. But in general, this population of golden wings is the only known, well, we think it's the only known population in New England right now. And so we've become a significant part of this conservation plan that the Golden Wing Warbler Working Group put together. Originally, I don't think they thought we were considered to be that important, but now we know how much habitat we have and how many birds we have. And so now we are an important part of that plan for long-term conservation. And typically the habitat that these birds are looking for is a mix of openings like these grassy forb areas, so they could have goldenrod, grasses, asters, milkweed, shrubs that we would ideally be native shrubs. So that can be dogwoods or viburnums. And then all of that abutting a forest, a mature forest, which Wheeler Park has all of these components when you think about it, and we can talk more about that in detail. But the birds like to use trees within the shrubland for singing perches and advertising themselves to their mates or potential mates, and they use the kind of lower vegetation, some of the right on the edge of these shrub patches right near the ground is where what they use for nesting. So they actually build their nests right just above the ground or right on the ground. Oops, sorry, wrong direction. So as I mentioned, we've did the modeling to determine habitat. We've also done a number of surveys. We started our initial kind of look for golden wings on the Velco power line that runs from West Rutland all the way up to Williston. And at the same time, we've also been working with landowners that have been identified in some of these models or through other mechanisms. And we work with these landowners to talk about ways they could potentially manage the habitat to enhance it for some of these species. In order to make that happen, we sometimes are able to secure funding for the landowners, and either we'll talk more in detail about that too, but either through federal or state or private funds to make that habitat or make that management happen on the ground. And then once the habitat's been managed, we work on determining how successful it's been by surveying an area after the management has happened. In addition to all of that, like we had hoped to be out in the field with people, showing them the habitat and talking about this. We do quite a bit of education, both on some of these public parks where we work, as well as like demonstration sites online or story maps, that kind of thing. Mark, do you want to start talking about some of our engagement?
Yeah, and I'm going to need to, since you're in control of the computer, I'm
Yep.
going to need to just tell you when to do next. So, you know, a lot of our work, especially now that we have some of these new GIS maps and models, is to reach out and work directly with private landowners. And in this case, what we're talking about with this talk is our work with land trusts and municipalities, towns, things like that, public owned property that we can often have a number of the attributes that we're looking for and provide access to the public to those sites. They're often birding hotspots in many respects. So we've done a number of different events, bird banding demos, which we had hoped and maybe will still do over at Wheeler, workshops, you know, media events, and of course presentations like this. Go ahead, Margaret. You know, and one of the things is we, as part of this work, have developed BMPs, best management practices for work on the ground, which allows us to manage the habitat and keep it in that shrubland aspect. And one of the big ones we found out is simply going into sites and removing the invasive species. So things like honeysuckle, buckthorn, multiflora rose are often a fairly large component of these areas, fallow farmlands where we're working. And so by going in and removing those, we actually not only eliminate the invasives, but we create these gaps that a lot of these birds need. We will retain tall trees. Margaret and I, when we go out to a site, will often work with the contractor, marking things to be cut and marking things to be kept. So those trees are ideal for perching and singing. And then our goal is to really focus on retaining the native shrubs, dogwoods, viburnums, blackberries, which are important for these species as nesting habitat, and also provide a great pollinator source, as many of these shrubs are flowering shrubs, and along with the goldenrod and some of the field components, create a great pollinator habitat as well.
Yeah, just add that the invasives, even though they provide the structure the birds like for nesting or breeding, they don't really provide the nutrition that they need. Some of the bugs or the insects that use the invasive shrubs are not as nutritious for the birds as the natives.
So there's a number of different ways that we, you know, here's a picture of the habitat before we get in there. And then there's a number of different ways we kind of go in and tackle this. It can range from working with local technical centers. There on the left, you can see folks from the Hannaford Center down in Middlebury that bring out chainsaws, so manual removal. We do bring in equipment that can do it a little more rapidly. In the bottom part there is something we call a bull hog or a grinder. And then for the bigger stuff where we really need to bring in stuff, we use on the far right is what's called a brontosaurus. And it's a big, huge cutting edge on the end of an excavator that allows us to remove much larger trees and basically chip them on site. Good. So this is what the habitat looks like after we've been in there. And for the first year, it can look a little bit rough after we've removed stuff. Those folks that have been out to Wheeler Park have probably seen some of the habitat work that was done probably last fall. And but quickly within a year, or even by the end of the summer, most of the work that we do is in the fall and winter to avoid nesting for the birds. That habitat regenerates very quickly and hopefully with the benefit for those native shrubs versus the invasives. Go ahead, Margaret. And then once we're done, as Margaret mentioned, we go back into the site to see how our work, whether it's achieved its goals and whether we're finding the suite of species, including golden-winged warblers, in those areas. So this allows a feedback loop for us to, better hone our management techniques. So when we start thinking about working on public lands, which is a great example of what we're doing at Wheeler, you can see there's a number of locations in the Champlain Valley, in and around Burlington, South Burlington, Hinesburg, Charlotte, Starksboro, and all the way down to Middlebury. So these are all town-owned parks, or in some cases, wildlife management areas, the Lewis Creek Stream Bank Wildlife Management Area. We've worked at the Champlain Valley Union High School. We've done that. So there's public land on their campus, Japragues Park, which is right near that, the Charlotte Wildlife Park. In the future, we're going to start looking at doing some management at Catamount with the help of Ethan Tapper. And we've done past management up at Colchester Pond, too, along the right-of-way. And of course, Wheeler Park kind of sits right in the center of all of that. And so this is just another public property that we've been able to enhance, or hopefully enhance, for a lot of these priority species. So we're able to connect public and private landowners with a number of different funding sources. For our private landowners, we often look at the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and they are a big focus for private lands. But for our public landowners, we're looking at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Partners Program, which hopefully will be funding the Wheeler work. We've started a couple of new projects with the Habitat Stamp Program, the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Habitat Stamp Program, which if folks go online and purchase a habitat stamp, that money gets put back into on-the-ground management. And of course, we get a number of different funding sources from private and donations and funding that way, and different grants. So I'll just go through a couple of different parks or public properties I've worked on. The Charlotte Wildlife Park was one of our first one. We got some money through a program called Together Green, and we had a bunch of volunteers that got out there, and we removed invasive species in different areas. And just recently, we had a bird that I banded back in 2016 show up there for, folks saw it last year and this year. So that bird's 5 years old and returning from Colombia or Nicaragua. It's a blue-winged warbler that has come back to this same spot every year. Okay, Margaret. Wright Park down in Middlebury, another town-owned property, has a trail system through it. It's managed by the Middlebury Area Land Trust. As I mentioned, we are working in the areas which are in orange, and we've got this great partnership with the Hannaford Center, where we work with the students there. They practice their chainsaw skills. We teach them about managing for this type of habitat. So it's been a great all-around way to keep that park managed and keep the invasives out of that site. Japragues Park, we did some work there back in 2012 and again this year. This park is well known for its golden wing and blue-winged warblers, as well as other things. And the funding this year came through the Habitat Stamp Program. So this is Andrea Shortsleeve, who leads up the program, and Brian Washburn, who's the contractor that did the work, working with this mini excavator to basically get in, select for the invasives, and leave the natives behind.
Yeah, and I'll just add, when we're doing the work, it tends to be in the winter or definitely outside of the breeding season. So that's why a lot of the pictures you're seeing, there's snow on the ground or, no vegetation showing, because we're trying not to do the work, or we don't do the work when the birds are there breeding.
Another site, like I mentioned, is the campus up at CVU, Champlain Valley Union High School in Heinsberg, very close to Depregs. And again, you can see this is work that we did this 2 winters ago up there. And we're engaging the students. We did last year. Unfortunately, with things on hold, we weren't able to do it this year. But to continue to maintain removing the invasive species as part of their classes, we worked with a number of project graduation students to complete that project. So this has been a great partnership with them as well, both getting the management done and putting in a lot of education as well. And then Wheeler Park, which is the primary focus of some upcoming work. And I'm going to hand it back over to Margaret to finish that up.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So you can see in this picture here the outline of the shrubby areas in Wheeler Park. Below that is mostly forested habitat, and then on the upper left of the park is mostly open grasslands, although some of the shrublands are kind of entering into that grassland area. So I have been working with Ashley Parker, who is a South Burlington Parks staff person, to talk about ways we could maybe improve the habitat at Wheeler Park, mostly by removing invasive species, just because there are a lot there, and I know that's been a goal of the park for a long time. So I met with Ashley, and I've met with a couple of staff, Mike Bald and Andrew Noonan, who do some of the management, brush hogging and things like that on the park property, and talked about ways that we can improve it. And maybe what I'll do is, because we couldn't do a bird walk, which was planned for next weekend, I think, we put together a little video of some of the habitats there and some of the birds that we saw. So maybe what I'll do is I'll play that video if we can make it work, and then come back to what we're planning to do. See if this will work. Mark, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see the video? Okay.
I can see YouTube, and I can see it's working.
Yeah, and it's working hard. Here we go.
Looks like it might be a little choppy, Margaret.
Okay.
Are your kids on devices?
They're not here. Is it still choppy?
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna
Okay.
work. I can hardly hear you.
Okay.
Well, we can probably try to post this on the web after we're done here. It
Yeah,
looks
that's what we'll do. That'll probably be better. So we'll just go, we'll post it on the web with the recording of the talk. It's just maybe 5 minutes at the most video of some of the habitats and some of the birds that we saw when we were out there. We were hoping to do a banding demonstration as well as a walk, which unfortunately we can't do this year, but maybe the banding we could do in the fall when the birds are moving through, or later in the summer, if we limit the size of the group, possibly, we're not quite sure. And the walk, maybe we could do next spring. But just to give you a little bit of background on what I've been talking with the Parks Department about is maybe removing invasives to help create some of those gaps that we talked about, but also promote some of the native shrubs and allow them to really take over in these shrubby areas rather than the invasives, which are relatively dominant at this point when you walk through. And I know that Andrew and Mike have been working hard to remove a lot of those, but it's a ton of work. And so what we're hoping to do is line up some funding through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Partners Program this winter to get a machine in there that can grind down a lot of those invasives, maybe get rid of some of the taller cedars, which are encroaching on the shrubland, but leave the native shrubs and some saplings and trees to create that habitat that we've been talking about. So I think it's looking good for funding to come through in the fall or winter. And when the management is happening, I'm sure we will be putting up signage and making sure the public is aware of what we're doing and why we're doing it. Another thing that Ashley's been doing, which has been great, is working with UVM students to create signage, educational signage in the park. And there will hopefully be a sign at some point that talks about golden wings and why they're important and why that habitat in Wheeler Park can support them. So we're kind of continuing this work, expanding as much as we can in the Champlain Valley. As we talked about, we now have areas to the north of Burlington that we're hoping to work with. Mark's been reaching out to landowners there. And we'll be assessing habitat and trying to involve more landowners in this work as in both private and public land. I'm actually working with Fish and Wildlife Department on another WMA in the southern part of the valley called the Narrows, which is in West Haven, and it's right near the Nature Conservancy's Buckner Preserve, which has the sort of highest concentration of these birds. So gradually, little by little, we're increasing the acreage and the number of people that we're working with and reaching about these birds and how to protect them and save them. Sorry about my dogs. Wherever we can, we try to bring funding in to support the work that we're doing. At the same time, we also really want to know how the birds are responding and whether or not our work is making a difference. So we will continue to collect as much data as we can on the effects of our management work. Mark, do you have anything to add on that one? You're muted.
It's kind of an exciting time. Birders are out there using eBird and collecting a lot of data. We're seeing all sorts of different types of birds. And as far as hybrids, there's a big question out there, how closely related these two species are. There's a genetic study that was done by Cornell where they're 99.97% the same genetically. And we've got great funding sources and partners that are looking to do the work or fund the work. You know, with the new habitat stamp program, which, you know, I throw out there, it's worth getting out there and purchasing a habitat stamp, or the partners program or NRCS. We're getting a lot done on the ground, and it's great to see the birds back and using the habitat we've created.
Yeah, so as we mentioned, a long list of partners and over the years, ranging from academic to public and private, nonprofit, as well as the towns that we're working with and the land trusts that we work with locally in some of those towns as well. And we have a variety of funding sources to support our work for Mark and I to be on the ground giving technical assistance to the landowners and land managers who are doing this work. But I think that's pretty much all we have to tell you, but we're happy to take questions. So since it's a pretty small group, we can go either way. We can, if you want to show me a hand, if your video is on, we can answer your question, and you can unmute yourself, or you can write into the chat box. There should be a little bubble that you can click on and then write a question if you have one. And Mark and I can take turns answering, or just talking about birds. We're happy to do that as well.
So Margaret, I'm just gonna try the chat box just to let everyone
Okay.
know. And folks should see that pop up.
So there's a number that popped up. That's a way you can chat if you don't want to speak.
We could also just unmute everybody and see if there are questions that way. It might get a little garbled, but we, like you said, we don't have a lot of people on.
Right, exactly. Oh, here we go. How long have there been golden wings at Colchester Pond? That's a good question. I know there were some a number of years ago, and that's kind of what got us interested in the management, which we did, I think, 4 years ago now. So I don't know if you know how long, Mark, but at least because the power line's been there a long time, I think it's been quite a while, but I don't know exactly.
It's interesting in that we really don't know how long golden wings and blue wings have been part of the Champlain Valley. You know, as farms have slowly let some of these fields go fallow and the habitat has been created, they could be a pretty recent addition over the last 50 or 60 years to the valley, at least in numbers. And you know, a lot of the reason I think Colchester Pond is there is because Velco has adapted a management practice that allows low shrubs to grow, and so they've taken advantage of that site because of that.
Yeah, and I know that when we were doing the survey in 2014, Ted Murin, who's a volunteer who kind of got us involved in the survey, found old records of golden wings, but they go back to the 30s, and they were down at Buckner in West Haven. So that's really all we know, I think, about golden wings being in the Champlain Valley. And because the habitat is ephemeral, it doesn't stick around forever. These birds may move from one area to another, and it's hard to document them staying in one place over a long period of time.
Yet that said, like I was saying, both the Charlotte Wildlife Park and we had another bird at DePragues Park, which have returned year after year. And we did a geolocator study years back where we put little backpacks on the birds, and they took them down to their wintering areas and came back. And so we were able to download the data, and we found most of our birds are wintering in Costa Rica, Panama, Colombia, spread out, at least the golden wings, with the blue wings a little bit further north.
Yeah, so they are faithful to the site once they find it, and that's a good reason to manage it so they will keep coming back.
Correct.
Next question, do you do much work on town-owned property that the town maintains? Are you talking about South Burlington properties? Yes. So no, not yet. I'm hoping to get involved in some more work with the town. I've worked with them a little bit on other species like peregrine falcons at Red Rocks Park. That doesn't really have the shrubby habitat we're looking for, but there's the new park, Underwood Park, which we're hoping maybe we'll do some work there in the future, possibly some plantings. And then I know that there's Muddy Brook, but that is not maintained by the town. So I don't really know of any other parks you're thinking about, but if you have ideas, you can always let us know. Do you know of any others, Mark?
I don't. I think you got most of them there, at least for this type of habitat. You know, Red Rocks is certainly a great birding location for birds migrating through, but the structure that they like is already there.
Yeah, and it's relatively mature forest structure they're looking for.
Any other questions? Oh,
Yep, there's another one. Oh, we don't have any questions, but want to thank you for your time. Thanks. You're welcome.
you're more than welcome.
Yes. Well,
Thank
it was great to have everyone on. And if there aren't any more questions, maybe we'll sign off, but I will give it another couple seconds just to make sure. And whoops, here we go.
Yeah. And thank you. And get out and enjoy these parks. One of the best thing about these town-owned lands is that they're accessible and you can walk around on them, you can bird on them. You know, you can just get out and about. So it's nice to be able to work on habitat that is easily accessible to the general public.
Yeah, there are a lot of great birds in these parks, not just the ones we're talking about tonight. So definitely worth a visit. Well, thanks for coming and take care and stay well.
Bye all.
Bye.